Hey, greetings, sister. How are you?
Greetings. Happy Thursday to you. I'm so happy to be back in the Rose Garden. I've missed you.
Hey, likewise. I'm really grateful and happy to be back here again with you.
This week has this week has taken off for me. What about you?
The whole year, it's evaporated. It's evaporated like you snapped a finger and it's over with.
Right. So now we're looking at the holidays, which means, oh my God, the dreaded time for all the family to come around.
It's funny you say that because people were asking me what my plans are for the holidays, and honestly, I really don't have any plans at all. And they were saying, "Well, do you guys have a tradition? Don't your family get together for holidays?" And I said, "That's not our culture for that, which I feel like is strange and unusual for most people,
To some
especially
people, right?
yeah.
Some people. But we had that culture. I think we did have that culture if you think
When we
about
were
it.
kids, we did.
Yeah, when we
When
were
we were
kids, we
kids,
certainly had we certainly had that culture. But as we've evolved and moved in different places, I think that has changed. Plus, we've changed. I think personally, professionally, spiritually. So I think the holidays mean certain different things to me. I really struggle. I don't know about you, and I know my family does with Thanksgiving in particular, because
yeah,
what that
definitely,
represents.
absolutely, yeah. We sharing that same that same conflict. I was thinking that the holidays are something that traditionally are imposed on people. It's something that we're embracing as a collective societal culture. That this is this certain type of holiday, and it should be celebrated in this type of a way. So just being an independent thinker and free mind, I don't try to allow somebody else's imposition on the way I'm gonna live my life to impact what I do.
Right, right. Like your holidays and the way you do it are not going to be mine. But are there other reasons why you don't rock with Thanksgiving?
No, I mean I don't rock with Thanksgiving because of what you said in terms of the underlying story of what it's trying to purport. Like it's trying to
Right,
make it
right,
seem like, yeah, that it was a very kind, friendly transition for these colonizers and settlers in this country when they started claiming lands from indigenous people that were already here.
right,
And they trying to make it seem like that there was this camaraderie and gratitude and appreciation for what the indigenous people did to welcome, embrace it, and help them survive.
right, right.
But then it has zero reflection on the fact that they uh, they annihilated all those people, stole their lands and properties and all that stuff, and basically try to extinct their culture.
Right. And annually, we all run around and celebrate that in their
Yeah, it's
faces. So my
crazy.
family has definitely changed over time on how we celebrate that and what that means. Although being with family is important. And I think again, if we take it back to our grandmother, she instilled that into us, that like being with family is important. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it in the ways that are traditional. And as the wise woman did do, she always told us they might be family, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to have good boundaries. And that's what we're going to really talk about and spin over today is relationships, and particularly the sibling relationship, because I think that's an important one for you and I think it'll help people one understand why this is so meaningful to us and what brings us together. So my brother and I were Ralph and Susie. I don't know if y'all know that we were Ralph and Susie. We used to have very big imaginations when we were younger, and when there was time for us to engage in imaginative play, my brother, who really did not talk much, this that the person you see now wasn't the kid that he was, but his sister was very verbose, and I would go and say, "Let's play games. Let's play tennis, and you're going to be Ralph, and I'm going to be Susie." And so we used to have these. I would think like we dreamed about our future and about the possibilities of our future in this kind of staged way, where we were taking on and embodying different personas, and I was Susie and you were Ralph. But what was meaningful about that and why I bring that up now is, Ralph was always instructing Susie because I was impulsive. I was younger, so I had less, you know, body control and physical control than you all had. And so, one beautiful thing about when you were playing that role is you were instructive, like hold the badminton thing this way, and you don't need to run so fast to hit it. It was always this instructive role, and that's one of the things that I really think when I think of sibling dynamics. It's there is a hierarchical structure, but it's important to see to play to people's strengths. I know one thing you never did was tell me to be quiet. You just let me talk as much as I wanted to talk. You and Uncle James had a very beautiful way of like sitting in silence and still connecting with me when it was appropriate, but then also being instructive and teaching me things that I needed to learn to navigate social spaces, academic spaces, grandma spaces, how to get away with certain things. So I think the sibling relationship is such a fitting place to start, because also in our sibling relationship, we have another sister who, I mean, we're all stair steps. We're all these Irish. Our parents
So
is
she's the first one. So
she's
she's
the
the
first. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm the youngest. I'm the last, and I get to hold all y'all up. And so she's there, but you and I are estranged from her, and I think we're now, as January rolls around, it'll be going on 5 years,
Wow, I didn't
roughly.
realize that.
Yes,
That's awesome.
January. Yeah, it'll be 5 years of this really pronounced separation. I would say I haven't spoken to her in 5 years. I don't know about you.
The times that I've spoken with her, which was one or two times, but I think it was in the spirit of trying to address the fractures that exist. But yeah, aside from that, no. So yeah, this is a very serious separation has occurred.
Yeah, very long sit, and that's important. So we're going to talk about it, but let's first talk about the birth order, because we talked about the sequence of I'm the youngest, and I think you all see the youngest very differently than I do. I certainly embrace the fact that I got the benefit of watching and observing all the mistakes that you all had, but I also very much was my own free thinker. I had my own way. We had very different personalities. And I think one of the real truths about being the youngest is that, I felt okay. Like I felt I was going to survive in life. And I don't know about what that means to you, but I always felt like, they could do things. So I was going to be able to do things. I had this like real physical model of young people that were just like me, that were doing things. And even if I did them differently, I didn't feel as afraid all the time. And I think that might be feel a little different being a middle child or a first child. I think for sure for the first child, you
Yeah.
have to feel
Well,
like,
I can't speak for the first child. I mean, I can only speak for my experience, which is being the middle child, but also being the only male. It's like
mm-hmm,
being the first child, anyway, right?
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
also, I think like I just be wondering what it may have been like for Lavinus, for example, because she was, like I said, she was there before we came along.
for
It may
five
be
minutes before 5 minutes, just
right,
5 minutes.
not
She didn't
long,
have much.
but but then also I think that she also has this mentality that she wants to be in charge and she wants to lead and stuff like that. So I think that as being the first child, there must be some sort of sense of responsibility and obligation to the younger siblings.
Mm,
I could see that she she has that in her. But then also, the our unique circumstances and conditions or whatever, I could imagine like how that shaped her too.
mm-hmm,
But some parts of it also is who you are as a person, like what your spirit and soul dictate to you.
mm-hmm.
When I think about myself in the situation, I'm a lot like how you described it. I never thought that I wasn't going to be okay. I always thought everything was going to be good. I knew I had to figure things out on my own. There wasn't. I guess I didn't have an older brother, older male that was closer to my age that could help guide me in any kind of a way that I needed to be directed in regards to how to be a man or what sort of things was going to come at me and what stuff I had to deal with. I had to figure that stuff out on my own.
Was
But
that harder for you? Because I mean, like I said, I had such great models. Was it harder for you?
I would say, at the time, I didn't think of it as being harder. But knowing, I guess having like some wisdom now, it'd be the same thing as like say trying to figure out a discipline on your own through self study versus going to somebody, a teacher or someone, professor that knows how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually guiding you through, and they can help coach you on mistakes you're making and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think like you can still get to the same places, in either path, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's some people who don't go to school at all academically, but they really intelligent and they can figure things out on their own and stuff. But I do feel like that when you have let's just call it a master or some that you follow, they the master, you the student,
Mm-hmm.
that path is much more accelerated.
Mm.
I mean, because they can show you a lot more. Whereas if you did this on your own, you don't know all of those things specifically, but you
Right.
do figure them out because just by living it out and experiencing, you're gonna feel for the edges,
You know
right?
what that's called? Trial by error.
Yeah,
But but what I'm hearing you say, that trial by error living isn't necessarily negative, and I think especially for people who, like us, who in some sense were abandoned children. I mean, we had our grandmother obviously, but we didn't have full time parents necessarily, and so we were a lot. It was a lot of trial by error because every part of our circumstance was so different, and that stood out. But
yeah,
what was unconditional and permanent, at least to me as the youngest, was my siblings. Like, you all were always there. There is not a memory. I share this with my children now because I want them to be really close to each other. And I say, there's not a memory that I have in development that my siblings were not there. And that doesn't mean they were all positive memories, because we certainly had our well, you and I didn't necessarily, we didn't go at it that much. You were such a kind soul, like normally and naturally. But my sister and I definitely went at it, probably for many reasons. We had to share a bedroom, we're
yeah,
two
yeah,
girls, things like that. But
yeah.
there's just not a developmental memory that I have that you all weren't in it. And so the influence of that is really important, and particular with our fracture, because now I'm building memories as this older person without somebody who I would say foundationally was such a critical part of my life.
Well, I think that might be something that your older siblings probably have that different from you, because there are some portions of my developmental years where I was by myself, right? And I think for the most part, you and the Venus were together all the time, because I know even when during the summers there was times when I was with Grandma and Uncle James on my own.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
guys were somewhere else, but you guys were always together. So the
Together
girls
a
were
lot of the
always
times.
together. But there was a time in the Venus's life too where she was out the nest at an early age, and I could see how at that time, and she was older. I think she was around 15, 16 or something like that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She was a little older, but she was still in the development.
Development, of course, absolutely.
Yeah, so I could see how that may have affected her, because
Mm-hmm,
she was definitely not inside the situation anymore. And
mm-hmm,
then also myself, it was the same
mm-hmm,
where, but I think like when, when I'm on the course of that path, then I feel like, it has to affect you as well. Cause then by virtue, you might be in the same environment,
mm-hmm.
that we were in all together, but you are there now by
By
yourself.
alone,
Yeah. You're
yeah.
there by yourself now with the environment that we all familiar with.
Right.
Right.
So you're creating a lot of safety nets, because again, you all represented in some way safety, where I had to create pseudo relationships and pseudo safety situations and pseudo kind of family members and siblings to take the place, because you all did leave so early in the sense, even though we're so close, decisions that you all had made and life trajectory change shaped that. So it's definitely interesting to have this discussion at various ranges of development, because I am again the youngest and you are the middle. But you're right. I had an older sister and an older brother who shaped a lot of, like, I have to say, you shaped a lot of like my overall and identity, for especially relational identity with other people. And some of it was probably not as good as I would have liked, because I recognized that it was like a lot of fear-based living at that time, because my siblings were always kind of telling me what not to do. And as much as they were good instructors, I don't know that they were good motivators. Like, oh, do that, move, do more of that. It was a lot of like, don't do none of this. So, and I don't think older siblings appreciate how much of an influence they have when they're like, don't do this and don't try that. It really, you're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be like that. And why shouldn't I do it? So that certainly was my reality as the youngest. And I had two people kind of pressing down on me, two people with very different personality styles, two different ways of acting and being. So, the question always comes to mind then, how do you guys get from such a, strong dynamic like I'm describing to where we're estranged? And my son put it really colorfully to me the other day, where he said, Mom, I'm doing these kind of repair interactions because blood is thicker than water. And he truly lives by that. And he talked about the examples that we as parents struck for him, and the way we interacted and communicated and how we continue to facilitate repair. And that made me really kind of ponder for a second, is blood really thicker than water? And then what does that mean for boundaries in interaction patterns? So what I have to say first is, like, I like me far more than I like anybody else. So that means I'm going to be striving for my own vitality, my ability to function, my ability to thrive, regardless of if it's with people who are, quote, family. And if that means that I have to choose myself over my family, I think that's absolutely healthy. It's protective and adaptive. Like, I don't know that if I had maintained a relationship with our sister, if that would have been a healthy dynamic for me
Yeah. I
overall.
mean, I hear you on that. I think definitely to an individual, you definitely have an obligation to yourself to make sure that you're in the best situation and that you're set up health wise to be optimal. So I think definitely we all owe ourselves that, because nobody else going to do that for us, right? For an individual,
Right.
speaking. But then I think, when it comes down to this concept of blood being thicker than water, it's interesting because each individual exists in half, like completely. 50% we get our DNA from our mother, 50% we get our DNA from our father, who are are not blood connected,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like right now, when I think about you and your husband, for example,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in my mind, I see you both as more family than anybody else in your sphere of influence,
Mm-hmm.
around you.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then I mean, neither you guys aren't blood relative. You're not DNA relative.
Correct. Correct. We
Yeah,
chose each other. We
yeah,
chose each other.
but you family, you more family than your own DNA relatives are.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see that also in your son's experience, which he now has a girl and he has a family. He started with that girl, and I would say that family is probably more closer to him in the concentric circles than anyone else,
Mm-hmm.
which rightfully so it should be,
Mm-hmm.
and that the cornerstones of that beginning is not DNA relative.
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? So to me, DNA relative, it don't really, and as much as DNA relative matters, it depends on what these individuals are doing to foster the relationship between each other to make them be family.
So
Now
you're
I
like,
say
the
that is
quality of the relationship matters as much as the
just
DNA
the
connection.
fact that your DNA, that you share the same DNA. Because truth be told, well, if we look at like the ancestry.com or 24, 23 and me or whatever that is, you start like I start seeing this family tree of relatives being built on these platforms of people I have they're definitely strangers.
Right.
They're just names that claim to share the same DNA that I share. So I'm saying claim, but scientifically it's
They're
proof that
connected.
they're connected, but I don't know them. Like there's people in Cuba, this place, that place. I don't know those. So we could walk past each other. We'd be total strangers. They wouldn't know me. I wouldn't know them. And so at the end of the day, how does that differ from a stranger that's not DNA relative? I mean, it's the same base level of relationship. But then now you could have people who do not share your DNA composition, just like you and your husband, and then say like me and someone I could pick, and that could be my brother now, or I could pick someone and I could adopt them as a son. And we have a father son relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and I could love them, as my own DNA child, even though they may not be.
Mm-hmm.
I also be thinking about those things where somebody ran a game on you. You got a girl, you think this is your baby.
Mm.
You've raised this baby for 18 years or something like this.
Right.
And now you have this bond, like you, for all this time, until that bond has been tested or challenged, you don't know that you're not the father.
Right. Right.
In the 18th, 19th, 20th year, you find out you're not the father. So what now changes?
Right. Right.
Because in this situation, you still got love for this child. You know everything about this child and all this stuff. So now the fact that that person, I mean, it's a thing that
It's a
pains you.
real thing. It's something that's painful because there was an underlying lie. But to your point, the quality of the interaction, what you fostered and built, is is what's important.
Yeah,
So, in the analogy of blood and water, I think what we need to facilitate or maybe emphasize for people is, it's the quality of any relational dynamic and how you all care for each other within that relational dynamic. Humans are going to be imperfect, right? I wasn't the best sister all the time, I'm sure. You were damn near perfect, but you weren't perfect. But
no, definitely
you know,
not. Yeah,
you not perfect, but damn near perfect. But in those interactions, how you cared for me, how we cared for each other, how Pop and Nan care for my children, and Cav care for me. Mima is caring for her grandchildren. It matters because they are changing the way they interact, and the quality of that interaction is important. And I think in that analogy, what we should say is, it's not, maybe we should be the type of blood is thicker than water. What type of blood you referring to? That type of blood that's inconsistent, that's what is it called, conditional. I don't want that kind of blood,
well,
right?
it's an interesting thing that they use blood and water as the two differentiators, right? Because
Right.
the properties of water is just hydrogen and oxygen coming together. So that could spontaneously happen anywhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
Right.
you can't get blood. Blood can only be created inside of an actual living thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like it takes that organism to generate blood, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't get that outside of that organism. So we can't manufacture blood, like fake
Mm-hmm.
blood that
Mm-hmm.
is in any way meaningful, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that, and inside of that blood is basically intelligence, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's what continues to maintain to keep that organism alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's feeding you, it's doing all these things for you,
It's
right?
carrying important nutrients.
So like, so when someone is saying this blood bond, it's really supposed to be signifying something really truthfully strong, right? But I also think that in the the melanated communities in America and all these places that have been colonized,
Mm-hmm.
it sacred connection also is furtherly broke down
Mm.
because all of the family, whatever that would have meant to someone, was definitely
Was
disrupted.
systemically destructed.
Yes. Yeah. So psychologically, that has a major effect, right? And
Absolutely.
I feel like right now we're going through the process of trying to fix that, and maybe that's why like you said, these issues that we have as siblings, for example, like we're estranged from one of ours or whatnot, that that is inherited. That we
Mm.
don't know how to fix. A problem that seemingly is not that big.
Right.
Like
Right.
because right now I'll look at the issue and I would say, well, it's not like certain little boundaries that clearly breakers haven't happened. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
this person didn't try to kill you. They didn't try
Right.
to
Right.
they didn't try to sleep with your husband. They don't got deceitful things of that nature that could really create some real hurtful fractures. But yet, whatever the issue is, it's hurtful enough that needs to be addressed, and nobody wants it to continue to go on.
Mm-hmm.
In that same way. And everybody just really truthfully, like you say, in terms of establishing boundaries, wants someone to be aware. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
we talk about the properties of repair, right?
Right, right.
It's getting down to this deep understanding between people. I feel like that's the component. Like, one person knows that in the theater of interaction, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
There has to be, I guess you'd say this conceptual villains and victims, right?
Right, right. Every time there's a problem, you somebody's the victim and somebody's the villain. And like you said, it's a theater because some of it's no matter what actually occurred, what is continues to play out is far more magnified than
Yeah.
the actual incident, right? But go ahead in this theater
Yes,
of.
but sometimes the villain can sometimes the people involved in it can be both roles. You can be both villain and victim to the same person that's victimizing you, and that's also
Isn't that
a
something?
villain at the same time, because it's like a cycle. So you could be in this little warped cycle with an
Mm-hmm.
individual that you really do have affection and tender feelings for. And
It's almost like a dissonance. It's a cognitive dissonance because in certain conditions, under certain conditions, there's some positive and pleasant interactions, but under other conditions.
yeah,
And so when we're speaking about repair, though, we're saying that there has to be a real process, and that goes beyond today's conversation because we're going to talk about that process another time. But at the end of it is the awareness. At the beginning of it is the awareness that there has been some harm caused, and I think the other part of that is the awareness and acceptance that you had a role in it. Right. So if we can't start there, then repair can't begin. And I think
100%.
black and brown and really black people because I don't know too much about the browns. I know a lot about the blacks because that's who I kind of hang around with. Is we stand on the one with what our problems are and why we don't like somebody. They mouth too smart, they this and that, right? But we don't necessarily go above that and say, and my role in the mouth being smart, right? Maybe it's because you always got some look, or maybe it's because you have some attitude that is creating that smart mouth. So black people have a good understanding of their problem. They don't have a good understanding, and especially black families, of their roles in the problem. And I think that's what's a big, again, not for today's discussion, because today we just doing the rose garden therapy about, sibling relationships are not necessarily easy, right? Like they're important, but they're not easy. We've challenged the concepts of blood being thicker than water. I said I need a special blood type. You said that's interesting that we use that reference because blood represents this thing that can only grow in a body. It's got an important role, and it's actually, it grows with us and it grows with the person. So I understand that in such great ways. Before we end, what are some boundaries and interaction patterns that you think are impacted by black people thinking this way? Blood and is thicker than water. What are some of the behaviors, maybe not necessarily the bound, what are the behaviors and interaction patterns that you think are impacted by this?
Well, first of all, I think that the behaviors and interaction patterns. I feel like there's no base level standard that people need to adhere to, right? Like I feel like there's some natural fundamental core values. That's what the whole Ten Commandments is supposed to be based off of, right?
Mm,
And I think when people are conducting themselves in a certain kind of a way, you got to be able to adhere those standards. Now, when you are not, that's where I feel like you're crossing some lines that where you outside of out of bounds, basically,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And then things happen, like conflicts happen when you get out of bounds. Like I think Proverbs 18:6 something says something about what you said about uh, how a person's mouth will get them into things. It's like whose mouth will get them into fights or something like this. It said.
Right. Don't you look at that church boy's upbringing? Grandma Rose taught you well, did she? She made you very learned about that Bible.
I heard somebody mention that earlier. That's why it's fresh in my mind. But but I was thinking that I think that everybody has boundaries, right? Even the
Right.
human body got boundaries, right? It's only so much pain your body will take before it shuts itself down and you start becoming distant. That's why, like boxers, when they fight, they get hit a certain type of way to get knocked out or whatnot, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's just basically hitting that button that shuts the body down from
Mhm.
further traumas and impact, right? So
Mhm.
that's a boundary. You
Mm.
find a boundary you get crossed. Like when you're physically working out, when people talk about they hit a wall,
Mhm.
and that wall of exhaustion that comes out and makes you feel like you got to quit or whatnot. And some people can make it beyond that wall. They can get a second win when that thing get, but it's a boundary, and you find these limits. Everybody has them. We all have these. Everything in life and existence has boundaries, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So, and if these boundaries get crossed, then it's catastrophe. In
Mhm.
terms of the cataclysmic outcomes, right? Like, say, if the earth is tipped off its axis slightly, it changes the weather patterns and all this stuff. And devastation could happen. If the planets collide with each other, you know, complete devastation, annihilation of existence could occur. So, like, if these boundaries aren't respected, it's so much chaos and conflict that could occur that you have to really, when there's more than one party or body to be represented, you now have to establish boundaries. You know what I mean? Yeah, because that's the only way that there could be some seamless, peaceful coexistence
Right.
with
Right.
knowing what those boundaries are, right? So
Right.
that's the important part of being able to effectively communicate them, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
hey, like this is what we gonna do. We gonna agree to this. This is where we gonna stand.
This is
And
how
all this.
we gonna stand on this. Right.
Yeah, we're gonna stand on this, and then if it is crossed, now we got to address it, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
now what happens? Like that whole agreement is tore up, right?
Right. Right.
Now a whole new agreement is rewritten, you know.
Right. Right.
So it's definitely important, and it's like no matter what, these are like some fundamental rules that nobody is free from it. Like everybody is subject to this. That you have to respect these boundaries,
Right. Right.
and those boundaries exist whether you like them or not. And it's now just realizing what they are, because the more that you know about something, the more you can maximize it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but if you don't understand what the boundaries are and stuff, and I do think there's certain little things that come from ignorance. Like, let's just say there's a boundary for gravity, for example, right?
Right. Right.
So let's just say you're totally ignorant to that gravitational boundary,
Right.
and you are on a building that has 100 floors, and you on the roof of that building,
Mhm.
and you look in and you say, "Hey, I want to get on the roof of that other building," and you try to step across in the air, then it ain't gonna work.
Right.
But if you totally ignorant to these laws, I could see how you would try that, and it'd be fatal.
Right.
It'd
Right.
be totally fatal, and you'll learn then. you know, but it'll be too late.
It'd be too late.
Yeah, it'll be too late because that's the last lesson you learn.
That's the last lesson you learned. Well, let's not make this our last lesson that we learned. I enjoy so much hanging out in the Rose Garden with you. Your insights
Likewise,
are
same here.
very, very much appreciated, and I always love your analogies. As we wrap up, is there any other final wisdom that you want to give the people?
I can't think of anything right now at the top of my head, sister. What about you?
Well, what I want to go back to is what you said, that uh, the biblical reference of our tongue, and I think we should probably maximize our. It'd be better if we actually knew the verse, but let's just say it's somewhere in the Proverbs that your tongue can be really an influence on outcomes for you in relationships, and I think that that's something that again, Black people need to work on that. You know,
Absolutely.
there's I used to say, there's not going to be no words unspoken between us. You're going to know how I feel, but maybe words unspoken perhaps is not the right way to have contextualized that. Is that we definitely need to speak words, but we need to speak words that are mindful of the heart, mindful of the soul, and mindful of the connection that we're trying to make with people, because words can be both, can bring us together and it can tear us down. And I think that's what has happened. And for Black people, it can kill you. You say too much that somebody might shoot you,
Yeah, totally agree.
or take you out. So you have to make sure that we are being wise with our words and using them in a way that are uniting, especially in a time like this, where it's so important to give reverence to what our ancestors have been through, what we're going to be going through, and how much that we need each other. We are a collective. This Rose Garden opportunity for us is not just our weekly time to connect and be together as siblings, which I enjoy, but
Absolutely.
also for us to kind of start a path of healing for ourselves, for our collective Black family, and for our family. I think for us for sure. It's a very vulnerable space to be in because we are both very private, and I know our family is very private. So to have some of these areas talked about and brought to the forefront is not going to be comfortable for them. It hasn't been comfortable for us, but it's also been very healing. So I'm enjoying this time. I can't wait to meet you in the Rose Garden again next week. And until then, I hope you all tune back in.
All right. Likewise. See you later, sister. Take good care.
You too.
Bye now.